Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful little creepy human being. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Hallowstein video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this craziness, okay, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the absolutely horrific murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart. The home invasion style murder that was inspired by the horror movie Scream. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week like this week, hopefully, and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. Okay, so now that I'm done essentially begging you to join my cult, we can get into the story. Now, this is a story that I had heard of and I've known about for a while, and I've meant to cover for quite some time because I don't know if you know this, but the very first video I ever did on my channel that was a true crime story was on the Gainesville Ripper, and the Gainesville Ripper is a serial killer that inspired the killer in Scream, and Scream just happens to be my favorite movie of all time. So of course, as a budding true crime enthusiast, is that right? As my interest in true crime grew as a small little person, when I heard of Cassie's murder and I knew that the boys who committed the murder were trying to create their own real life Scream movie, I found myself very interested. But as I got older and I started to really look into the case, especially for doing the video, it's just so horrifying. The story of what happened to her is terrifying. Essentially what happened here is in September of 2006, 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddart was murdered while she was house sitting for her aunt and uncle in Pocatello, Idaho. And once police started investigating her murder and looking into it, they found that what happened to her in her final moments were literally straight out of a horror movie. Cassie Jo Stoddart was murdered in a home invasion style attack where 2 men entered the home carrying knives and wearing freaky, like, bloody masks. Yeah, dude. And then when police investigated the murder, they found that the 2 individuals who committed the murder were literally trying to make their own real horror movie based off of Scream. So it's just, the story is nuts. With that said, I'm going to tell you the story today, and while I do, I'm going to be putting on a face of makeup. If you think that's weird and not really your thing, thank you for hanging out this long. That's cool. To each their own. I hope you find a channel you like more, but if you're kind of on the fence, like, I don't know how I feel, that seems maybe like it's weird, maybe stick around. You might be surprised by how much you like me. Now, with all of that said, come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart, the murder that was inspired by the horror movie Scream. Cassie Jo Stoddart was born on December 21st, 1989, making her a Sagittarius, and she was one of 3 children born to her mother, Anna. At the time of her murder, she was living in Pocatello, Idaho, which is a pretty small and safe community. Not the place that you'd expect this type of thing to happen, but as we know, evil is everywhere. And at the time of the murder, she was only 16 years old and a junior at Pocatello High School. She was a creative kid who loved anything with the arts, acting, drama, painting, drawing, music. She was a smart and strong and kind kid. She had a boyfriend at the time of her murder named Matt, and though the relationship would be considered new to somebody my age, they were together about 1.5 years, and at 16, that's a pretty good stretch of time, and the 2 of them did really seem to like one another. Cassie was known to her friends and her family as just being a good, reliable, hardworking kid. She got straight A's and was even taking odd jobs here and there to try to save money to buy her own first car. One of the police officers who ended up handling her case after she was murdered said of her, and I quote, "She didn't do anything but attend school. She didn't do anything but be friends with somebody else and just about everybody." Does that seem like a poor quote to you? When I read it, I'm like, that doesn't really, that sentence is not like the best sentence, but I mean, I get it. I don't make the best sentences every time I speak either, as you well know. On December 22nd, 2006, Cassie Jo Stoddart was at the home of her Aunt Allison and her Uncle Frank, which was in an area called Whispering Cliffs. And she was there because she had agreed to stay in their home for them while they went away because they were offering her a little bit of money and she was saving up to buy her own car. So that's why she agreed to stay in this big old 2-story house, watch the house, watch the plants, watch the animals, just take care of things while they were away. While in the home, Cassie had taken the opportunity to invite her boyfriend, Matt, over so the two could, have some quality time. She was going to be alone in this big old house, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity for them to hang out and have some alone time together. So there Cassie was with her boyfriend. They were hanging out. They were having a good time when there was a knock on the door. And when they opened it, it was 2 of Matt's friends who had decided to just show up at Cassie's aunt and uncle's house. Now, I saw 2 different accounts on how these 2 friends came to know where the house was and why they showed up that night. One was that Cassie herself had actually told one of them like the day before that she was going to be there and that they should come over. This account came from one of the friends themselves. But I saw another account where Matt, Cassie's boyfriend, had actually invited the 2 over without telling Cassie. Either way, these 2 friends came into the house, hung out with Matt and Cassie, spent some time together, were just being friends, chilling, not killing. Or so Matt and Cassie thought. The 4 of them all hung out for a little while, a couple of hours actually, where they just hung out, they watched a movie, and it was after this that the 2 boys said that they were kind of bored and they wanted to head out. They were going to go watch a movie in a movie theater. They wanted to just do something other than just sit there with like Cassie and Matt while they were like smooching up on the couch. So the 2 say their goodbyes and leave without Cassie and Matt knowing that these 2 boys actually had plans to return and do something horrible. Absolutely horrible. These 2 boys were Tori Adamick and Brian Draper. Brian Draper and Tori Adamick were both 16-year-old boys who went to high school with Cassie, but they were more friends with Cassie's boyfriend Matt, so they were kind of friends with Cassie by convenience. Though, in later interviews, Brian did state that he knew Cassie independent of Matt, but that once Cassie had started dating Matt, once the 2 had gotten into a relationship, him and Cassie kind of grew apart, and this is because Brian had a bit of a crush on Cassie. Brian had met her first and had really developed a crush on her, found her to be very pretty, loved her smile, but she wasn't really into him, and that kind of bummed him out. And then when she started dating Matt, that really bummed him out, and it just kind of made him feel like an outcast. It made him feel unloved, and it kind of cemented this idea in his head that he already had, and that was that he was a loser, and this just confirmed it. Brian Draper said of his feelings towards the whole situation at that time, and I quote, "In the beginning, she was just a nice person. I was attracted to her. I thought she was a special person. But she started going out with this other kid I knew in high school and it kind of struck me hard. I was like, okay, so, I am a loser." Both Brian and Tori were very, very big on movies, film, particularly horror, which, same. Brian's favorite horror movie and favorite movie of all time was Halloween, which is a very good choice. And not that I'm complimenting him, I'm just saying that's a classic. And Tori's favorite was Scream. Same. These 2 boys loved watching horror movies and they loved the idea of creating horror movies, even creating their own. They were always filming like random interactions they had at school. They were those kids that just always had a camera on them and were filming everything they did. Kind of like everyone now, but then, 2006 it was a little less common. The 2 boys were also pretty interested in the Columbine massacre, the shooters in particular, and not in like a normal way, in kind of a admiration. They kind of admired these 2, particularly Brian, and Brian said of his feelings towards these 2 assholes, the Columbine shooters, his feelings towards them at that time, and I quote, "I saw at the time that they transcended their high school for the hour that they did what they did. They were in the spotlight, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to be in the spotlight." So once the 2 decided that they wanted to actually kill people, which I always say to myself, like, how does this conversation actually come up? What do you say? How do you feel that out? I don't know. It just seems absolutely crazy to me. But they decided they wanted to kill people, and they decided that they wanted to make it like a movie, just like Jill and Charlie did in Scream 4. But at the time that this happened, Scream 4 hadn't come out yet, so they weren't inspired by that, but I was thinking about that just now. And in Scream 4, that's exactly what Jill and Charlie were doing, was making their own movie. put it all online. But anyway, they did toy with the idea of killing a bunch of people in one fell swoop, like the Columbine massacre, because that was more of Brian's interest. But in the end, they decided, whoa. They decided they wanted to have a more condensed and personalized hit list where they would stalk and murder their victims one by one in a more personal type attack, more hands-on approach. And this was more Tori's preference. The boys even sat together and prepared a death list, which was just a list of their friends and classmates that they wanted to murder. So the two boys started to really plan this, and they became completely consumed with their mission. They wanted to hunt people down, stalk them, break into their homes when they were alone, and murder people one by one in their homes, just like in Scream. They even started to record themselves, like make videos of them talking about their plans, talking about what they wanted to do. Because remember, these boys were always recording everything they did. In August of 2006, the two boys convinced an 18-year-old boy to buy them a couple of knives, and he ended up buying them 4 knives. And I'm sure this guy had no idea, like, what they were for. I don't believe he was like, oh yes, I'm going to help these boys commit their murder. Sorry, I got this, you know. I don't think this guy knew what was happening. I don't think he was suspicious that they were going to do anything crazy, because if you look at these boys, you look at photos of these boys, they very much have a, like, I collect knives look about them. I can't explain what that is, but just look at the pictures and tell me they don't look like they probably collect, like, medieval blades, right? Right. Anyways, Cassie wasn't even the boys' first choice or main target. As I said before, they had their whole death list, and before Cassie, they had actually gone and tried to murder another girl, but she wasn't home alone, so they just left. So Cassie was really just, I don't want to say just a person of convenience, because I do believe there was something personal there with both of the boys, but it was just, she was home alone when they went, and it was easy for them, so they did it, which is just so scary and messed up. And then now I'm thinking even further, right? Because, okay, of why they might have chosen Cassie specifically. And I started thinking, if you think about Scream 1, if you've seen it, well, in Scream 1, which is what they're trying to recreate, right? Wait, let me backtrack a little bit. Later, which we're going to get into, the boys, like, recorded everything, you know, leading up to the murder. And in one of their videos, they were talking about how Cassie was so perfect, how Cassie had to be the one, how she was the best victim. And then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, Scream 1. The very first kill in Scream 1 is a girl named Casey Becker, which is pretty close to Cassie. And I wonder if that's part of why they chose her and why they thought she was so perfect, because the name Cassie was so close to Casey, and they were trying to replicate Scream. I don't know. Do you think that could have anything to do with anything, or am I just, like, grasping at straws here? So now let's head back to September 22nd, 2006, where Cassie is house sitting for her aunt and uncle. Matt's there, Brian and Tori had been there, they're watching a movie, I think they're watching Kill Bill. The boys say they're bored, this is lame, we're gonna go watch a movie, and leave. The two boys then left, as I said. They drove and parked down the street where they changed into their kill clothes, which were just all black outfits, complete with gloves, and those freaky masks that had blood coming out of all of the orifices. Actual nightmare fuel. And this was at about 10 p.m. The boys then entered the home into the basement through an unlocked door, and this door was unlocked actually because while the boys were there earlier watching the movie hanging out, Brian had excused himself for whatever reason, had gone downstairs and had unlocked this door so that they could get in later when they planned to come back and attack Cassie and Matt. They were actually planning to attack both of them. So they enter through that door, they get down into the basement, and they start making a bunch of noise. They start throwing ashtrays back and forth, trying to get Matt and Cassie to come downstairs and investigate the sounds, because their plan was to attack them in the basement to add to the scare factor, because basements are creepy, as we all know. But things didn't go according to plan for Brian and Tori, because Matt and Cassie did hear the noises, but they were like, absolutely fucking not, and stayed planted where they were, and just waited out the sounds and did not go down to investigate. And this is when Brian and Tori cut the power to the house. At this point though, Cassie and her boyfriend still stay froze, planted to their seats on the couch. And I can't even imagine what this was like because they're in this dark ass, creepy ass house that they don't know. This big old 2-story house in a place called like Whispering Hills or some shit, which is already like the creepiest name. Oh no, it's Whispering Cliffs. Creepy cliffs that whisper. And you're like trying to keep calm, but you hear like loud noises coming from the basement of this house, and you have these dogs that you're babysitting barking and growling at the basement door. I would be shitting my pants, probably. And I guess after this, some of the lights did come back on, but not all the lights. And I can't even imagine what they were thinking at that time. Like, what did they think was happening? Why didn't anybody call the police? That's what I would have done. I would have called the cops. Been like, hello, excuse me, there's somebody in this house that I'm in. Although when a stranger calls, but I don't know. But this is not what they did. Instead, Matt, Cassie's boyfriend, called his mom and asked if he could spend the night with Cassie because of how scared she was, how scared he was, how scared they both were. And his mom was like, absolutely fucking not. And I don't know if he didn't adequately explain it, if they weren't as freaked out as I would be in that situation, or if his mom heard what was going on and thought that he was lying because they were 16 years old and she thought her son was trying to get laid. But either way, she was like, no, absolutely not. And then she said that she was on her way right then to come and pick him up, that his time hanging out at that house was over for the night. Once his mom got to the house, she actually even offered, which was very nice of her, for Cassie, if she was scared, to come leave her aunt and uncle's house and stay at their house for the night, and that she'd bring her back tomorrow to continue house sitting. But Cassie turned this down. She thought it was her responsibility to stay in the house. So her boyfriend said goodnight, and he and his mom left, and this left Cassie alone in the house for the night. This is when the lights in the house went out again. And at this moment, Brian and Tori decided it was their moment, and they started to walk up the stairs, making sure that they were stomping loud enough that she would hear them coming. They were carrying knives. Brian was carrying like a dagger, and Tori was carrying a hunting knife. Once at the top of the stairs, Tori told Brian to do something that would scare Cassie, so he grabbed a door that he was standing next to and he slammed it, which I can only imagine terrified her. I don't know if she ran. I don't know if she froze. I don't know what the dogs she was watching were doing at this time, but the two boys then attacked Cassie, stabbing her over and over. The two boys stabbed Cassie about 30 times, 12 of which would have been fatal on their own. One of these stabs were deep enough that it actually hit Cassie's heart. They then left her alone in that big house to bleed out and die. The two boys then left, got in their car, and drove off, and as they were driving, they filmed their reactions to what they had just done, which was murder one of their friends. Brian was like freaking out on a high, not in like a bad way, just very hyper, what's the word I'm looking for? He was very overstimulated at what he had just done, and he said of it, and I quote, "I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke. I stabbed her in the throat. I saw her lifeless body. It just disappeared." Tori was calmer, more in control of his emotions, I don't know, dark, a little, just like a little odd, and he said, simply, "Shut the fuck up. We gotta get our act straight." They then went and got all of their items together, their clothes, their weapons, the videotapes, and they drove out into the middle of nowhere where they attempted to burn and destroy them, but they didn't really end up. It's weird because they tried to burn them, but like when they're recovered later, they really aren't that burned. Like some pieces are, but they're not that burnt. And then they buried them. After this, they went home together to hang out and watch a movie. Just relax after what they'd done and watched a movie together. Like everything was totally normal. The very next day after Cassie was murdered, Matt, Cassie's boyfriend, actually hung out with Tori, which in hindsight, I can't imagine how weird that is for him to know that he was literally just hanging out, palling around with a guy who the night before had literally murdered his girlfriend. And I guess while the two were hanging out, Matt tried to call Cassie several times, but wasn't able to get a hold of her, obviously, because she was dead. And it's also weird, actually, side note. I was watching some interviews, and it turns out, like, in Tori's interrogation, he told police that he didn't even like Matt. He actually, at one point, had hated Matt. So I don't know why the two were really hanging out. He said he found him annoying, didn't like him at all, but they were hanging out the day after Tori had killed Matt's girlfriend. Cassie wasn't found until 2 days after she was killed. And this is when her aunt and uncle finally arrived home from being away. And they arrived back home with their child. And it was their child, Cassie's 13-year-old cousin, who found her dead on the living room floor. And another side note, this family, Cassie's aunt and uncle and cousin, were completely ruined for this. Her young cousin, the one who found her body, went into a horrible depression afterwards and actually ended up trying to kill herself. And her aunt went into a horrible depression as well and ended up losing her job. They just wanted to move out of the house they were living in. They didn't want to live in the house where their loved one had been murdered, but they were finding it difficult to sell the house because nobody wanted to buy a home knowing that a teenage girl, Cassie, had been brutally murdered there. For what I believe would be like some silver lining, I do believe they were eventually able to sell the house and move, so that's something. So police investigate the murder scene, and they find that this was more than likely, at least in their mind, to be a personal attack on Cassie and not a robbery gone wrong, because there was a ton of stuff in this home. This was like a nice big home. There was a lot that could have been stolen, but nothing was taken. And in addition to that, there didn't appear to be any forced entry, so they assumed that Cassie had willingly let her murderers into the house. Police did initially really look at Matt, Cassie's boyfriend, but his alibi was pretty tight. They just thought that he was really weird because when they were questioning him, he didn't show a lot of emotion, especially considering, one, his girlfriend was killed, and two, his girlfriend was killed like right after he left her, so he was likely to be like the last person other than her murderer to see her alive. And you would think that would give you like bad survivor's guilt and stuff like that, and that you'd have an emotional response, but Matt did not seem to have that. The police asked him, like, why he wasn't more worried about Cassie, why he hadn't been calling her, why he hadn't driven over to see what had happened. He was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I have been very worried about her. I was calling her nonstop. I don't have a car. I couldn't just drive over because I'm 16 and I don't have my own car, so I called her over and over and I just couldn't get a hold of her. But I was worried that I couldn't get a hold of her. Police then ask him, like, okay, so what happened the last night that you saw her? And this is when Matt tells police about Tori and Brian coming over to the house, hanging out, leaving for the movie and all that jazz. So they're like, these two boys were there. And then it got even more interesting because Matt tells police that once he left Cassie alone, when he left with his mother, he had actually called Tori, and because he was supposed to meet up with them later, they were like, maybe we'll get together later. So he called them to let them know, like, hey, I'm not going to meet up later. I'm actually going home with my mom. I just left Cassie home alone. So now police know that not only were these two boys there when they did not know that, but that these two boys were privy to the knowledge that Cassie was completely home alone. Also, Matt was given a polygraph test, and I believe he passed, so. Then police move on to Tori, and this is when he tells them the boys' planned story that they had been with Cassie and Matt, had gotten bored, had gone to a movie, all that jazz. But when police pressed him and asked him for some more information on the movie, Tori couldn't remember anything about the movie. Police thought that was weird. Brian's interview was next, and he told police much of the same, that they went to a movie, and he too could remember almost nothing about the movie, what was playing, who was in it, what it was about, the layout of the movie theater, any of that. And side note, there's a lot of side notes in this, because my brain is on another level, but side note, if you want to, online, if you look it up on the YouTube machine, you can actually find hours and hours and hours of interrogation footage with both of these boys. And you can see like the questions asked, the way they answered, the way they acted, their facial expressions, all that jazz. And I watched all of the hours of it. Like, so I watched so much of it because I found it so interesting. And Brian definitely seems more nervous, more affected by what he's being asked, like more present in like the situation that he's found himself in, whereas Tori just seems like weird and disconnected and very childlike. And this stays through his interviews later in life too, which I also watched, that he's always seemed like stuck in time. It's very weird, but anyways, that's there if you want to watch it. Moving on. In investigating this crime, police had actually gone to the movie theater where Brian and Tori said they saw the movie. And they got there, they interviewed people, and this is when they found that the girl who was working the day that Tori and Brian were there, the girl who was taking the tickets, was a girl who wasn't only Tori and Brian's age, but actually went to school with them and knew both of them. And said that she didn't remember either of them being there that day, and that she definitely would have remembered them because she knew them, right? And this was weird to police for a couple of reasons. One, because she didn't remember them, which is weird if they were there. And two, because Brian in his interview had told had told police that the person who was working taking tickets when they went was a man, just some random man that they did not know. It was kind of hard for Brian to mistake a man that he didn't know and a girl that he did personally know as being the same person. Police had also started interviewing people who knew both Brian and Tori to find out more information on the boys, and this is when it was discovered that the boys were obsessed with horror and Scream and the Columbine shootings, and that they wanted to make their own movies and had been working on making their own horror movies, and that they also recorded their every waking move. Police also found out that not only did Brian like Cassie, but so did Tori for years. And that Tori was considered weird to others in school, that he was obsessed with horror and death and murder, and that he was obsessed with knives, which I already told you I had a feeling that these boys were obsessed with knives, and that he often talked publicly about committing the perfect murder, and that he was just one of those kids that was weird and sketch and made everyone uncomfortable, and just bad vibes came from him. And police were like, all this seems like something we might be interested in. So they end up going back to Brian and telling him how they thought his story was kind of complete bullshit. And this is when Brian sort of changes his story. Not sort of, he changes it completely. And he says, okay, we weren't at the movies. Instead, we were going around and breaking into cars. We weren't stealing anything, but we were just breaking in and ransacking and looking at what they had. But police were like, that's weird because we didn't get any calls at all of reports of break-ins in cars the night that Cassie was killed. And if you watch the interview, when Brian's telling police this, it's very clear that he is lying and making up all the information on the fly. So now the boys are in a little bit of hot water, and Brian turns on Tori a little bit. First, Brian tells police that the whole thing was meant to be a joke, that they were there and that their whole plan was to just scare Cassie. That's why they went into the house, that's why they wore those clothes, that's why they carried those knives, and that's why they wore those masks. It was just to pull a prank and scare Cassie. But that once they got upstairs, Tori just lost it and actually killed her. Brian says he had no idea what was going to happen when they got there. He had no idea Tori was going to do this, and that after it happened, Tori had actually threatened him and told him if he told police the truth, he would murder him next. He also told police that he could prove this information, that he could take the police to where that they had disposed of and burned of their evidence. And boy, did they find a ton of evidence. There were 2 dagger-style knives in their sheets. There was a silver and black-handled knife with a smooth blade, a folding knife, a weird, creepy, bloody-looking mask, a partially melted, multicolored mask, gloves, clothes, shoes, partially burned notebook paper, a melted bottle of peroxide, a book of matches, and a videotape that contained footage of the 2 boys explicitly planning Cassie's murder. The tape also included the footage of them reacting to having had killed her, and a transcript of this tape was read in court, and in court, when they read this, they talked about how the boys were saying they wanted to be famous and be considered, go down in history for being notorious serial killers. That was their plan. That's what they were going for. To which I say, maybe we aim a little higher. Maybe we aim a little higher. I don't know. Upon finding this evidence up in the hills, up in the wherever they fucking put it, wherever it was buried, police found themselves having an even harder time believing that Brian had nothing at all to do with the murder. They're convinced that he definitely had more to do with it, and he was just hiding how involved he was so he didn't get in trouble. And they eventually were able to get him to admit that he had stabbed Cassie just once, and it's because Tori told him he had to because he was there and he wanted him to trust him and he didn't want him to kill him too. But eventually they got him to admit to stabbing Cassie several times. On September 17th, 2006, both boys were arrested for murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Both boys were found guilty in their separate trials. First, Brian Draper in April of 2007. Cassie's grandfather said of Brian's conviction at the time that he was convicted, and I quote, "One down, one more to go." Her mother, Anna, said of Brian's conviction, and I quote, "I'm just happy my baby got her justice." Tori Adamick was found guilty in June of 2007. Both boys were given life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder and an additional 30 years to life for the conspiracy to commit murder charge. Brian's conviction for the conspiracy to commit Brian's conviction for the conspiracy to commit murder charge ended up being overturned due to errors in jury instructions, but Tori's was not. But it didn't matter because they both have life in prison without parole. So at that point, it's just for like the shock value, really. Like what difference does that make? I don't know. Both Tori and Brian have tried to appeal their convictions, but they have both been unsuccessful. But there is something. So I don't know if you recall, but in separate cases we have discussed this, where the laws have recently changed in some places regarding minors being given the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the laws changed so that that's considered a no-no for minors. So, and the law was to be applied retroactively, which means, technically speaking, Brian and Tori could be up for new sentencing, to be resentenced for their crime. But so far, nothing has happened. So we'll just have to wait and see if and when that does happen. In 2010, Cassie's family filed a civil lawsuit against the Idaho School District. They claimed that the school was negligent and should have known that Brian and Tori posed a threat to others. But this suit was unsuccessful. So in researching this case, I watched a documentary on YouTube called Lost for Life. And in this documentary, it's basically like a bunch of different people who were convicted of, who were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole when they were minors. That's what the whole documentary is about. And in this documentary, both Brian and Tori were interviewed, and this is when they were 21. And Brian did his interview alone, and Tori was accompanied by his parents, just like in their initial interviews. Brian was interviewed alone when he was a minor, and Tori was with his parents then as well. And in this interview, you find that Brian has taken full responsibility for what he's done. He says it's like the hardest thing you can do in prison, especially when you were like that young and you've killed somebody, is like sitting there and admitting that you did this, you deserve to be in jail for it, you are responsible for what you've done. And Tori has not taken responsibility at all. He still claims that he was not there, he was not involved. Well, not that he wasn't there, that he wasn't involved, that he did not commit this crime. Brian said in the interview that his main memory of Cassie is just her smiling. It's the weirdest thing because he does seem to be remorseful and regretful and affected by the fact that he killed her and sorry that he stole her life and her future. It's such a weird thing to sit and watch. And I mean, that's great, I guess you can say. Like, that's the reaction you would hope. That's the best you can get when somebody has brutally murdered somebody this way, is that they would take responsibility and that they would feel fucking terrible about it. But even if he does take responsibility and feel horrible, he's still the same kid who said in a videotape, and I quote, regarding Cassie's murder, "I'm sorry, Cassie's family, but she had to be the one. We have to stick to the plan. And she's so perfect. She's gonna die." And then he laughs, and while he's recording this, Tori's sitting right beside him writing their little death list, and he shows it to the camera. He's like, "This is our death list," and it's the list of people they want to kill. So Tori, as I said, to this day takes no responsibility for the murder, though in the tapes when they were teenagers, he said of all of this, and I quote, "There should be no law against killing people. I know it's a wrong thing, but hell, if you're gonna restrict somebody from it, they're gonna want to do it more." And ends it with, "I'm horny just thinking about it." But still, he says he wasn't involved, that he took no part in killing Cassie, that he's never once made an admission, even when he was younger. He never actually admitted to doing anything on tape. He never made a confession in his interrogations. And to this day, he still hasn't. In his interview for the Lost for Life documentary, it's exactly the same. He still denies everything. And he still seems, to me, the best way to describe it is lost in time or stuck in time. He just seems exactly the same. Even though he's 6 years older, he still seems very much like a child. and like the way he talks, the way he interacts with his parents, the way he looks, his mannerisms, he just seems stunted. And during his interview, his family is there, and they don't seem to believe that he did it either. And they sort of talk over him and answer questions for him. And he almost seems like he wants to admit something, like he wants to get something off his chest. It seems like it's eating him, to be honest. But my thoughts is, as long as his parents are alive and around, I don't think he will admit to anything. Because my opinion, the vibe I got, is that he's very intent on not letting them know what he did, not changing their opinion of him in their minds, not letting them know and believe that he is this, especially his mother. So I don't know, but there's definitely something there. There's something in the eyes that you can tell that he might want to, but he's just not. With that said, that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart, the murder that was inspired by the horror movie Scream. What do you think? Isn't that just so stupid? It like blows my mind how dumb. You are so dumb. You are really, really dumb. You murdered this young girl who you guys seem to like for what? To be famous? To act out some weird like fantasy you had of wanting to be like the Scream killers or the Columbine shooters? That's really lame. Dude, because like I love Scream. It's my favorite movie of all time. I love it so much. I love everything about it. I'm interested in the Columbine massacre, just like most people who live in America and have heard of it are. But to go to these extents, to take somebody's life, it's just so disappointing. And it's so frustrating that these two found each other, because truly, just based on their personality types, I do not think they would have been so bold and brave to do this if they had been going at it solo and had been more independent. I don't think it would have happened, but it did, and that sucks, so. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you every bit of information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for hanging out and just like remembering Cassie with me today, because what happened to her is so up and so pointless, and I can't even imagine how terrified she must have been. Like, imagine being in that situation. Imagine being in a house alone. Like, we've all been there where you hear a noise and you think it's something, and then you're like, no, it's nothing. But this time it was a noise. There's like loud banging in the basement, and then these two guys literally come up the stairs carrying knives and wearing masks and attack you and stab you, and they're your friends. I wonder if she even found out that it was them. I just can't imagine how scared she was, and it breaks my heart. And then I think about these like young guys who did this, and I'm just like, it was so pointless. It's so pointless. They've wasted their lives, and they took her life, and it's all for no reason. And then one of them doesn't even take responsibility, doesn't even like say, you know what, yes, I did this. I killed her. I stole her life. I stole her future. I erased her from the world. I took her away from every single person who loved her and cared for her. I can see why that would be hard to say. But it's your responsibility to do so, and it's just fucked up that you don't, but that's all. Anyways, please let me know of any other cases you would like to see me cover down below, both morbid makeup or Hallowstein content, because I will be filming both. At this point, the day that I'm filming this is October 8th, and I'm still filming Hallowstein videos, so if you want something that fits into that category, leave the suggestion down below. I may still be able to get it up for you and use your suggestion before I'm done filming. Just kind of depends on how my schedule goes. It's been kind of crazy here because I'm so tired and filled with a baby, you know? I don't know. And yeah. Also leave morbid makeup suggestions down below, because starting November, we're going back to that. And I love getting your guys' suggestions, because you guys are just filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. Of course, if you haven't already, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, because I put out new videos every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, I have all my social media linked down below. I have an Instagram, I have a Twitter, I have a Facebook page, and I have a Facebook group. And I love talking to you guys on there. And if you want, you can also look down below, and I have all the makeup listed that I'm wearing, the nail polish, the lipstick. I made merch. If you haven't seen it yet, I made merch. Can you see it? Chillin', not killin'. Because you guys seem to like when I say that. And I'm wearing it today. And if you want one, The link will be down below for your convenience. So yes, you asked, I listened, and now we have merch. It comes in white and black right now. So, and I might have another launch coming on my birthday, which is November 4th. I can't promise, but we're in the production part right now of making the design. So we'll see. Check back. You're the best. Okay. With all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and have a happy Hallowstein, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye. Oh my gosh.